Featuring prominent industry vendors, moderated by an independent analyst, Solutions Review presents the Expert Roundtable, an in-depth panel discussion focused on solving strategic enterprise challenges.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to this Expert Roundtable on data security, trust, and privacy for analytics in the cloud. Today, we've assembled a powerhouse panel of professionals from some of the leading data and security solutions, including Snowflake, Satori Cyber, and Monte Carlo. We've gathered this panel to share their experiences, discuss best practices for integrating solutions, and offer guidance for establishing a sustainable information risk program. To drive this discussion, we've invited veteran data expert David Lotion. Recognized as an information management industry thought leader, David is president of the firm Knowledge Integrity. He has also been an analyst for TDWI and a regular contributor to TechTarget. David is also a senior lecturer and faculty lead for the Careers and External Relations program at the University of Maryland's College of Information Studies. David, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Doug, and I appreciate you inviting me to lead this panel. This is a topic that is of critical importance to everybody in the industry, and certainly in the wake of events like the fine that was levied against a relatively large social networking company about a week or so ago. It is something that must be top of mind for everybody. So let's start out with introductions. We've got three panelists with us today. Anush, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anush Saburi. I'm a principal product manager at Snowflake. I lead the product security initiative within Snowflake. Thanks for having me here.
Hi, Ryan Kelch. I lead security and compliance at Monte Carlo.
Hey everyone, my name is Yoav Cohen. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Satori and also the co-author of the Snowflake security book.
Great, thank you for introducing yourselves. We got a lot of interesting topics to cover today. I'm going to start out with the topic of modernization, and certainly lots of organizations are either migrating, modernizing, or moving to the cloud. So what would you say is the biggest motivator for introducing or instituting a data security and trust program or framework today? What's changed over time that's led to those types of inspirations, you might say? Anush, why don't you start?
For sure. I would basically say the biggest motivation is the explosion of data. And this is motivated by the fact that cloud migration is happening and is happening at a much faster pace than it used to be compared to on-prem. And with this higher speed comes mistakes and more exposures that were not potentially exposed in on-prem use cases. The other thing that has changed is the way the application development has evolved over time. We have moved into microservices that come with data packaged into the service as a mounted drive. We have new CI/CD deployment channels that distribute software and data at the same time. And also, of course, moving to AI, there's a lot of data move that also allows for better training model, but also comes with the risk, right? And when you look at the average number of data stores for an enterprise, between 500 to 600 across things like RDS instances, blob stores, buckets, VM images, these are pointing at an explosion of data sources, and the hosts that can access this data is also across multiple places, like different types of endpoints, email software, on-prem, SaaS solution, or public cloud, right? And so with this, there is a need for reconsideration of your data security strategy and thinking about how to protect these diverse set of data silos.
So you hit a bunch of topics there, and one of the words that kind of resonated with me is use the term information risk. Ryan, how do you look at this whole question of information risk as a kind of a catch-all for all those motivations for instituting data security and trust?
Sure. So I think one of the things that resonated with me there was that customers, as we make this move, almost have an innate fear because they don't understand what is going to move as part of this process, right? As we're moving big data from place to place, a lot of organizations, especially in the security world, we don't truly understand what's being moved. It was just this big blob of information that's moving. And so having a data security posture or thought process, even as you start to make these big transitions, is really helpful from a security perspective, at least, to understand what's moving, how it's moving, and what my risk posture looks like as it moves or once it finishes moving.
So Yoav, in the context of what Ryan was just saying about risk posture and what Anush had mentioned in terms of information risk, especially he touched upon a lot of points, including data volumes, the distribution of data. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit about what he said. What are your thoughts on the motivators?
So I think the underlying trends are very interesting. You see companies innovating more using the data that they have, becoming their competitive advantage versus other factors which we're used to in the past. We all have access to the same technology. It used to be that only Google was able to index the web, but now any startup can go and index the web. So the horizon for innovation has moved to forward to other aspects. So many companies are data driven. They're building data driven business models in fintech, in health tech, in technology. And with that comes data democratization. Everyone needs access to that data because everyone wants to contribute, provide value, and innovate. You tie that with the complexities that Anush mentioned on the infrastructure level. Honestly, it's a mess. And yeah, it's a huge challenge when it comes to doing that cloud migration, shifting all that data, because you shift only the data. All the security around that data stays on-prem. You have to go and rebuild it in the cloud. And what I see many companies, they're very focused on, let's get the data, let's see that we can analyze, process the data, read the data, but then security is almost an afterthought. And no matter how much you put emphasis on that in the beginning, it's always going to be second priority to actually being able to use the data. So I would advise companies to put security at a higher priority, but it is still a challenge.
So one of the things, Yoav, that you pointed to, one of the things that Anush mentioned, and I'm gonna paraphrase this also a little bit. You referred to data democratization, data enablement. I know that from some of the projects that I've worked on, one of the biggest struggles with the transition to a hybrid multi-cloud data landscape is just getting a good understanding of balancing the ability to manage the data versus the ability to deliver or provide, do data provision. And so, as far as your data consumers are concerned, they're looking at a single pane of glass, which behind that has links and connectivity to on-prem, multiple different cloud service provider services, as well as hosted services, software as a service, platform as a service, et cetera. So, Yoav, let's go back to you for this. How has this transition to this hybrid multi-cloud landscape complicated the whole question of data protection, especially when it comes to data consumer enablement?
Yeah, it's a very big challenge, because if you go back 10 years, most companies were using, I would say, a handful of data technologies. You would have like maybe one operational database, and you would have maybe your data warehouse. But now, as Anush said, and we see also, most companies that we work with have a multitude of data technologies. And they have on multiple clouds and with a very large scale, hundreds and hundreds of databases from different types to manage. It's really hard to manage all of that centrally. And it takes a lot of investment, engineering, compliance, and so on to really get to a point where you streamline that process to your end users. Because you mentioned data enablement, which that really resonates with me. At the end of the day, what we're here for is to enable our employees, our users, to use more of the data and innovate. But doing that centrally, for most companies, it's a very big challenge. And our advice is to go seek help, tooling or services or otherwise.
Ryan, let me turn to you on that. I think you guys have a certain perspective on this whole question about security and trust in these hybrid landscapes, especially from an observability perspective. How has this this hybrid landscape, complicated data protection?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we see a lot from our customers is the lack of consistency between controls for the various clouds. So as I've mentioned, as we see different vendors enter the space, the ability for us to protect that data in the various systems becomes complicated. There is no central pane of glass. There are a lot of tools that help, but they're never going to cover them all, right? And I think as we think about expanding visibility to these various data sources and helping these data teams be successful. On the security side of things, there's always a worry of, are we overexposing to other vendors for the sake of observability? Are we putting our compliance posture at risk for the sake of making our data teams more effective? And I think that's a constant pull between the two organizations. And to be honest, in my mind, there's not a perfect solution for this right now, but it is understanding what each vendor provides or doesn't provide, and understanding the level of impact it would have to not have this visibility versus not having access to this data. And I think the business drives a lot of the risk decisions there, but we see a lot where customers start to wonder, are we doing the right things? And is the juice worth the squeeze as we implement new tooling and new data stores?
Yeah, it sounds like, if I'm going to summarize what you just said, it's that there's a constant conflict between enablement and protection, which is you're walking a fine line. The more you protect, the more you can't use, but the more the consumers demand, the more complicated it gets to manage that protection. So Anush, Snowflake is one of those vendors that I think Ryan was referring to. In a hybrid environment, a cloud-based data warehouse or a cloud-based data lakehouse or a hybrid lakehouse, which you guys I think are promoting as well. It's just one of those sources that needs to be managed. And in fact, when the kind of thing that Ryan was referring to about data protections, the rules for protection are not, they should be applied to all the data, no matter where it's sitting. But you've got your own capabilities for enforcing access control. So how do you reflect on the need for standardization of enforcement of those controls?
Absolutely. And I want to echo everything Ryan and you have said in terms of the challenges of a multi-cloud. The way I tend to think about this is, as we think about application security and how it evolved from a perimeter-based security, even on-prem, moving to cloud, it has to move into a kind of app-centering approach. I feel there's a similar need for data as it gets moved to cloud, right? And the traditional perimeter-based approach for security wouldn't work when you have data that is distributed across a global network across multiple CSPs, right? And there is a need to have a data-centric, context-based approach to security when it comes to data. And also making sure that, as Ryan mentioned, given that every platform, every CSP have their own APIs and their own security postures and assumptions, having an approach where there is a common control over all these different knobs, if you will, is going to be extremely important for customers. They really want to benefit from things that allows them to set it once and use it across different places, right? And in my opinion, I think it's important to think of policy enforcement as much as possible being centralized as the data access path, right? And in a way that it's done agnostic of where data is or what the service is doing, right? And so with this, you can provide a consistent way of defining and simplifying your policies, and then leave the hard work to the translation layer that actually maps that to the specific CSP controls. And I think that is what we're fighting to, is that simplicity, define it once and use it across everywhere. And I think that's key to have, to Ryan's point, have a unified control across all different data sources.
So you raise an interesting point there about being data agnostic, and I think that actually is going to lead us into our first speed round question. So you guys have 30 seconds to answer this. We're talking about data protection and data security and trust for analytics in the cloud. I guess the implication is that the data that needs to be protected is what we might call sensitive data. So I'm using that as a blanket term. So Anush, how do you define sensitive data?
So there's some classic definition like PII, PHI, and PCI that have been used in the industry, but I think every customer may have a specific definition for the term. Trade secret for one customer might be sensitive data versus the power grid information for another government sector. So I think it's very specific to customers.
Great. Yoav, let's go to you. How do you define sensitive data?
I would say, if it gets out and you're embarrassed or your organization is impacted negatively by that, it's sensitive data. And I think most data is sensitive data.
Ryan, let's go to you.
So I agree with everything that's been said here. I think we follow the same principle that if it ends up on the front page of a major newspaper and someone would be embarrassed about it, whether it's us or our customers, then we should consider it sensitive. And I think giving customers the flexibility to define that is critical to defining what sensitive data actually means.
Okay, that was excellent for a speed round. You guys all did it within less than 20 seconds each. So maybe we'll do some more of these speed rounds. But what you've done is you've inspired me to ask another question because I'm synthesizing what you all said. Comments like letting the customer decide, all data is sensitive. We're going to go back to what we were talking about before, which is kind of navigating the fence between data accessibility and enablement and data protection. If all data is sensitive, then nobody should be able to see it. Or on the other hand, if there's different roles that people have, then they have the privileges to be able to see certain types of data under certain circumstances in certain scenarios. Are there different strategies for protecting different types of sensitive data? So let's say you have laws that are talking about protecting personal data or private data versus what Yoav was kind of referring to, which is the data that when it gets out, it becomes embarrassing, which might be like the Sony breach a couple of years ago, where there was information about who they were paying and how much they were paying for roles in movies, which turned out to be embarrassing. So, Ryan, are there different strategies?
Absolutely. So, providing frameworks that customers can make those choices is really important. I think having an ability to accommodate a customer who's making a decision on whether or not I'm comfortable with you vendor having that access or vendor having that data is kind of the first step in that. Within applications, being able to provide mechanisms for role-based access control or least privilege to be maintained once the data is being accessed or retrieved in some cases out of a data store, and maintaining those levels of controls into the applications themselves, not only maintaining it, but helping provide visibility into it. So someone's not using, say, Monte Carlo as a mechanism to get access they shouldn't have. Being cognizant of those customer needs as you roll those strategies out is really important.
So Yoav, what are your thoughts on
that? So I think conceptually, it's pretty much the same. You really want to understand where your sensitive data is, and you want to have the right policies in place to limit access to folks and only use it under the right purpose. The technical level, things get very complicated because structured data is very different than unstructured data, usually sits in different places. There are different strategies and different capabilities to protecting different types of data, and some companies may need to use more than one tool to be able to do that.
So yeah, let me drill down into that, Yoav, a little bit. Ryan mentioned role-based access control, and is that going to be sufficient, especially when you're talking about having to have some kind of additional layers to help with that?
Yeah, so I think role-based access control is where the story begins. I think that's the most basic and logical thing to get started with. Well, role-based access control, hits the limit is where you have to start defining more and more roles. And when you find yourself creating a role a day, that's not a great situation. Then companies, we see them move to what we call ABAC, or attribute-based access control. Basically, these are policies a bit more complex to write, but then easier to maintain than role-based access control. Basically, the policy stays the same, and when the metadata changes, the policy automatically adjusts to that. And there's actually something even, we think, beyond ABAC, which is just-in-time access. So instead of trying to define upfront all of your different policies to a very detailed level, build processes for people to get access to the data by defining the hoops they need to go through to get access to the data. And everyone that can go through these hoops is eligible to get to the data. You don't have to provide birthright permissions or write very complex policies to be secure and compliant in the way we think about it.
So that sort of sounds like a combination of role-based access control and attribute-based access control, maybe managed within a taxonomy or an ontology that allows for adding additional layers or constraints such as context, location, those types of things, right?
Correct. When you look at the mature implementation in a large-scale organization at the enterprise, you would see a mixture of both of these three strategies for sure.
So Anush, you're one of the folks that needs to deal with this sort of thing. What is Snowflake's perspective on these different strategies for data protection?
Absolutely, and I definitely agree with both Ryan and Yoav on the thinking here. From a Snowflake perspective, we have a general framework, right? And I think Yoav kind of got to some part of this. First is know your data, which is understand, classify, and track data and usage. Second is protect your data with things that Ryan mentioned, including RBAC, among other policy-based access controls. And lastly, connect your ecosystem to manage the data estate end-to-end, right? That's our overall thinking when it comes to data governance. But very specific about your question, and I think this goes back to your kind of a question about sensitive data. Since sensitive data means different things for different customers, in our opinion, the customer has to think about their threat actors and the goals, right? We talked about like trade secrets, and so the person who's interested in stealing that is different from sensitive energy grid information, right? And so knowing who your attacker is important in building your data security strategy. And for that, I think the platform, and this is what we did within Snowflake, should provide ways to have a kind of a data context-based approach to access policy, where this level of sensitivity of data is taken into account when you define policy. So, for example, things like tagging that allows you to tag a specific column in the table, combined with different types of policy you can include. For example, dynamic data masking that allows for columns with sensitive data to be kind of masked for certain users but not for others, or row access policy that has sensitive data, or even like technologies allows you to enforce privacy before the data is imported into the table. I think combination of all this combined with context-based access, like you have mentioned, can allow a customer to have flexibility of, still allowing access to the data, but to the right persona, right? And I think that combination is what is needed to solve this problem for diverse definition of sensitive data.
So it sounds like it's like the need is for a maturation of a combination of these different, I guess, policy-based access control, which swallows up aspects of role-based access control, attribute-based access control, and context-based access control. That just trying to summarize what you guys are saying. So it leads me into this next question. In March, the White House administration released a national cybersecurity strategy. And one of the key tenets of that strategy is rebalancing the responsibility to defend cyberspace by shifting the burden for cybersecurity away from individuals, small businesses, and local governments, and onto the organizations that are most capable and best positioned to reduce risks. Yoav, in what ways does that motivate vendors and service providers in terms of data protection and data security?
So I think that strategy resonates with me to some extent. I think centralized cybersecurity defense can be very effective at the infrastructure level. Think about the internet infrastructure, the network infrastructure. However, when it comes to data and applications, I think it's going to be less effective, and different strategies would need to be developed and implemented to really lift up the way the nation's defenses are behaving and performing. Now, I can't see. I can definitely see the government getting more involved protecting, the electrical grid or the internet infrastructure. I really don't see the government getting involved within our applications and databases. But one strategy that can be effective and can be promoted by the government is promoting more compliance in organizations. If you look at ISO, SOC, and other types of compliance frameworks, they have really good controls around data security. And I think if more organizations adopt these types of compliance framework earlier in their life cycle, that is going to have a big impact on the overall defense efficacy, and that's something the government can really promote.
So let me turn to you, Ryan. Kind of the same question, but modulated a little bit based on what Yoav was just saying. I know that there's government organizations that have produced strategies or checklists or assessments to help organizations figure out how to evaluate and understand their risk profile and the threat surface. But in the context of what this national cybersecurity strategy says, if we are looking to take the burden off companies to have to be trying to manage this, as well as I'll refer back to the intricacies of roles and access controls and those types of things that we were talking about before. What can vendors do to make this easier for an organization?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we're seeing in the industry right now is actually kind of a misalignment, kind of to Yoav's point. At the infrastructure level, it's pretty well understood, right? From a security perspective, that's 10, 15 years old technology. And generally speaking, we all speak the same language. When we start talking about compliance at the application layer, we're really talking about data here. There's a misalignment, I think, as you think about CCPA or GDPR, where governments of some kind have tried to step in and assign some level of responsibility and direction. I think we need to get to a point where we have commonality in terms, commonality in direction, commonality in thought processes, so that we can, as a business who is responsible for visibility into or security of data, we can have a direction that we can follow. Right now, when we have competing initiatives, I think it leads to a less ideal user experience. It creates confusion in the industry. And as we continue to grow and change, where we can help is to continue to advocate to our governments, to our partners, our vendors, to help solidify kind of a common understanding of what data protection really means, so that we can all kind of head in the same direction.
So let me push back a little bit on that. There's over 80 national data privacy laws. In the U.S. alone, there's an increasing number of states who are defining their own data privacy laws, and none of them share the same definitions. So if you look at CPRA and you compare that with Virginia privacy law or Privacy Act, the definitions of what is personal data and what is private data differ. So how can vendors help their clients navigate the explosion of different types of policies that need to be supported?
It's a good question. So I think from our perspective, what we do is we try really hard to kind of level the most common across the various areas where there is areas of focus, where a state's law meets the EU's GDPR or Australia's privacy laws or anything like that. We try to align kind of to the best practices of all of them. But what that does is it essentially pushes us harder to, as a vendor, to communicate these are the areas in which we consider relevant or important to the information that we're partaking as part of your environment. And here's how we're protecting them. And I think it helps us drive our security and compliance program to align to the best of all of them. The challenge with that being that it sets the bar pretty high, and the bar will continue to raise as the minimum bar between the different organizations and the different governments kind of align. Will continue to be better, and I think that's a good thing for the industry.
So Anush, in contrast to a company like Ryan's company, you guys are the gold queue, the treasurers of all the gold in the organization with managing large volumes of data or massive volumes of data. So I would think that you guys have a different perspective on what vendors or service providers are able to do in terms of addressing the initiatives or the strategic goals of that national cybersecurity strategy. What do you guys have to say?
For sure. So the way we look at it, and we're very supportive of the actual paper. The paper proposes a social contract. Basically, the key point in it is that those companies who are capable of basically affecting security of the users should do so, right? And we, being a data steward, we definitely take that exactly as a principle. And when you think about what we think this could affect all the customers is to understanding that, there is a need for reinvestment in cybersecurity. And we feel like this strategy paper can help making the data providers think about the spectrum of the users that are out there and make it such that, the secure by default is a principle, right? Because of the potential downsides of misconfiguration by non-security experts, right? So I think this will help the ecosystem to move to that model. Within Snowflake, obviously, we have this principle, secure by design, where security is built into the products, and we want to expand that to compliance by design, right? And so, again, goes back to the conversation we have about having a common control plane across different data silos that you may have, and make it simple for customer to be able to reason about their security or compliance posture, right? So I think that's our overall approach to this, and I feel like it nicely lines up with what the strategy paper is calling for, which is, level field the game for everybody when it comes to cybersecurity, and make it easy for people to increase their cybersecurity strategy, even though they may not have a dedicated a large security team, right? So I think lowering the bar and making it simple is key to achieve that goal, as the paper calls out.
So Anush, I want to explore this a little bit more with you, only because the implication that I got so I read through the cybersecurity strategy document, which I thought was great. But one of the implications that I took away from that is, and this is one that a lot of my colleagues have promoted as well, which is cybersecurity. The concept of cybersecurity has drastically changed, although most people don't really know that it's no longer a question of a denial of service attacks and trying to steal credit card numbers, but it's any aspect that involves getting accessibility to information to which they shouldn't, or they're not authorized to see, and that's not, perimeter security is no longer sufficient. Mechanisms for data protection and encryption, those types of things, are critical. But this change in perspective kind of talks to the next level of data management, which is not, is my data being protected, but rather are the interests of the customers to which we are providing service being globally protected, or when we are providing a service that might allow for a data marketplace or a data clean room. So in a data marketplace where organizations are making their or some aspects of their data available to other customers, or a clean room where a trusted third party is providing the capability for doing data integration that couldn't be done within the administrative domain of any of the particular participants. So in that context, we want to be able to provide data products, but we still have to enforce these compliance with these cybersecurity initiatives. So what's your perspective on that?
Absolutely. And I think to your point, when you think about how customers divide their business, they may have even different departments that may have to collaborate on data. And again, same compliance regulation may also apply. So just add another vector to the examples you brought up. But I think our overall recommendation, obviously, is not to transfer data, right, when sharing between the accounts. And to your point, the right way to do this is to do it through privacy preserving collaboration technologies, right? And so you want to be able to share access to the data without actually transferring the data between the accounts. And so we do, as you mentioned, we do offer certain solutions for private collaborations, which allows multiple parties to use same data sets to build insights, including clean rooms. And I think using these technologies allows the customer to still be productive, at the same time not having basically kind of concerns about violating their privacy and compliance regulatory requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that gives us the opportunity to cycle back to a topic that came up before, which was, again, it was straddling the barrier between data accessibility and data protection. So we're going to do another speed round on self-service. So in order to enable our data consumers, often we are looking at environments or landscapes where there is a simplified mechanisms to allow the data consumers to get access to enterprise data without having to go through an IT group or through a developer to be able to provide access. So here's the question. As the communities of citizen data analysts and data scientists become more literate, organizations have been inspired to enable self-service. How can these organizations easily integrate access controls into these data access services? And Yoav, I'm going to go to you first on this one. Speed round.
Yeah, so this is a very hot topic for us over at Satori. And the way we think about this is you don't want to provision users to data, you want to provision data to users. And basically what that means is solve 80% of the problem by defining the swim lanes where users can get access to data, and those swim lanes define the level of access they get, which policies apply to them, and then just let them run within those, swim within those swim lanes, and you have a system that is maintaining itself on an ongoing basis, and for 20%, someone can get involved manually and solve that problem, but most organizations can define those swim lanes and solve that problem up front.
So Anush, maybe you can follow up on that, since you're one of the data providers in this arena. What do you think? How can they integrate
Absolutely.
access controls?
100%. I totally agree with bringing data to the compute environment. And so, bringing the compute environment to the data. Basically, the key, in our opinion, is to make it seamless, right? Where the policy enforcements are done agnostic to where the data is, and are managed in a centralized way, such that the data scientist does not have to think about authentication and just get to be productive on what they have to do. But then the security team can rest assured that the data is secure, right? And we talked about also the kind of recommendations on how to share data when it has to be done across different business units within the same customers, or across different business entities, different customers as well. And I think combining these two would be a recommendation on how to think about self-service access to data.
Thanks, Ryan. Same question.
So we're kind of in the same boat. So we focus really on making sure that we are not getting in the way of preventing data scientists from being able to do their job. And so relying on existing controls that are already in place, but also making sure that the data scientists are enabled, the data teams are enabled in a way that's effective, I think is kind of our approach to managing this problem. We rely heavily on our vendors. We rely heavily on the partnership within our customer base to make sure that we are not over provisioning, but we're also not under provisioning.
So these things that you guys are talking about, they all kind of relate back to a topic that it was implicit in the cybersecurity strategy and came up in conversation earlier, which is this whole question of compliance. There's a growing number of laws that are directing assurance of data privacy, data protection. And this is what I was saying before. These different laws have different definitions and specifications and requirements and different penalties. And that depends not on the data, and it doesn't necessarily depend on the individual, but it depends on the context and the government jurisdiction and the location and other factors. So, for example, the California CPRA, transactions that a California resident does while they're on vacation in Las Vegas, they may fall under the same constraints, but a person who lives in Nevada, who is in the hotel room right next door to that Californian, does the same transactions with the California company, and those transactions are not subject to CPRA because they're not California residents. So why are the traditional data security tactics insufficient to implement compliance with these laws? Anush, I'm going to start with you on this one.
For sure. I think, like you mentioned, there is the difference in the nature of the definition of the terms within this. But the other aspect of this is the fact that they keep evolving, right? They're not the same. And the fact that you need to evolve your system to be able to match into a moving target is going to make it hard if you have a solution that is not updatable from a centralized way, like a cloud solution. And the other part of it goes back to conversation we had. Different platforms, different CSPs have different controls, right? And being able to reason about how they map to a given compliance requirement is going to be a very hard thing for an average customer. And having a kind of a cloud agnostic solution, a layer that could sit on top of this and manage the compliance requirement and map them to security controls offered by the underlying platform, in our opinion, is key, right? And that's why a traditional data security solution on-prem would not be able to map into these moving target type of compliance requirements across platforms that have different postures and APIs.
Yoav, what do you think about that?
So the way I think about this is, why are we seeing so many new regulations and frameworks coming up? And we're seeing all of these regulations come up because there are bad actors who are finding loopholes with existing laws to basically profit from abusing our data, using it in an inappropriate way or sending it. You still see spam email. You still see identity theft. And so I think that having these new regulations, while it complicates operations for companies, I think it's a really positive trend that governments are getting more involved into fighting these. Now, there is a complexity in implementing these different types of regulations, but if you break it down into the basic elements, I think most of them share a lot. They all have a lot in common, and that is, you have to justify what you're doing with the data. It has to align with to the right purpose. You have to be able to explain why you're doing these things, and if you're like an honest actor, you're not looking to abuse or do something that is that if your users find out, they would be disappointed of you. You should be fine.
So, Ryan, let me turn to you. Yoav used the term explainable. So, explainability is an aspect of understanding compliance or the implementation or application for monitoring compliance. Your company does observability. How does observability fold into explainability, monitoring, and being able to do auditability of compliance?
To kind of to Yoav's point, one of the things that we do as we in pre-engagements with customers is holding ourselves accountable to what we are seeing, what we are doing, what we are acting on. we hold ourselves accountable to making sure that we can uphold whatever regulations a specific customer is concerned about or that applies to them. And I think what both you and Anish said before is that we can't apply some of our older technologies, right? So if you think about a geo IP restriction that we would have used 10 or 15 years ago to do something to protect someone in California, it doesn't scale in the same way in the example that you gave with someone sitting in a hotel in Vegas. So we try to make sure that as we present what we're doing as an organization, that customers understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and then making sure that that information is readily available, always and often, to the customers who care, and then being, for the same reason that most people use, say, a trust portal. We want to broadcast what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we want to hold ourselves accountable. So we want to make that available, and so everything that we do with transparency, just because we want to pass the administrative test.
So I want to refer back to something that Yoav said before, which you guys both kind of acknowledge, which is in the past when what we've been doing is we've been creating data repositories and bringing the data to the user or the data consumer. And I think what you said, if correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about bringing the user to the data. Is that the term you used?
So what I was referring to is, instead of saying, hey, user X, you have permissions to use this data, I said grant data to users or provision data to users by saying, hey, any user that goes through X, Y, and Z can get access to this data. X can be get your manager's approval, Y can be get the data owner approval, Z can be you can only use it without being exposed to PII as an example. If you check all these boxes, go ahead, use the data.
So that kind of gives that kind of unlocks the mechanism to get through that single pane of glass that we referred to earlier in the talk. And yet we're still talking about, earlier we talked about distribution, hybrid data landscapes, the need for, complexity, for managing the complexity of being able to provision that data to those data consumers. So let's do another speed round on this whole question about data at rest versus data in motion versus data in use. In these architectures that are distributed and hybrid, they're likely going to involve managing core data or source data assets, some at rest. Some of the data assets are going to be data in process, data in streaming data coming from streaming data sources. Applications are going to be interoperating, but yet we still want to be able to provide data on demand to those consumers. So what are the suggestions for how you protect sensitive data, knowing that some of the data is at rest, frequently most of the data is in motion, and that there's the delivery of information to the data consumer may involve calculations or transformations for presentation that is data that's never stored and is never in motion, but rather is information that's being presented and is in use. So, Yoav, I'm going to go to you first on that one.
Sure. So when it comes to data at rest and data in motion, I think, and probably Anush will expand on that, most of the data vendors nowadays have really good features and capabilities around securing the data where it sits in storage and when it's being delivered to clients, to users, primarily using various forms of encryption. What is most interesting to me is data in use, and that's where data gets to the hands of people, and that's the weakest link, right? Because they can do a bunch of stuff with that data, and you really don't have any control over what they can do. They can take screenshots of the data. So, in our perspective, the solution is via the organizational culture, the company culture, and to promote a more responsible and safe usage of data. we believe in making controls more visible, showing users that the organization understands what they do with the data, and by that discourage them from doing anything that is silly, stupid, criminal, against the law. And if users know that you have a way to know what they're doing with the data and there's someone watching them, most of them will be very discouraged and deterred into doing something inappropriate with the data.
Thanks. So you kind of pitched this over to Anush. So I'm gonna do the same. Anush, thoughts on suggestions for protecting data at rest versus data at motion versus data in use?
Absolutely. I think to Yov's point, it is all about end-to-end protection and encryption, right? One of the things that is very key is managing the blast ratio in terms of in case there's exposure. So having some kind of a key hierarchy that allows you to use different keys for different levels of objects is going to be key here. For example, one key for the table versus a whole account, having a different key. And then the other part of it, which we think is key, especially with the cloud provider, is giving full control to the customer. So there are some schemes that within Snowflake we support called Tri-Secret Secure, which allows a key from the customer and a key from Snowflake have to be present before the account is unblocked, like the movies, 2 keys in type things. But it gives customers that in case they want to stop access from cloud providers, they can just take away their keys, and that's basically key here too. So I think from a protection perspective, it's about being seamless. It's about reducing the risk and exposure, and also giving full control to customers. And I think that should apply to all stages of the data as we think about it.
Ryan, you're nodding your head. Clearly, you agree with what these guys are saying. But what else would you like to add?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, no, I agree. The data encryption, both at rest and in transit, at this point in this day and age, is table stakes, right? Not doing that basically means you're not in business anymore. So where we've found a lot of power is providing customers the ability to manage things that make them uncomfortable, whether that's access by customer managed secrets or customer managed encryption keys or whatever. Providing context and capabilities within a platform to allow a customer to feel safe that they're providing you some level of insight into their data structures is a key component to success and being able to allow the organization to move forward in their data journey.
So I think we have time for one more speed round question, and then before we wrap up. So quickly, Ryan, I'm going to go back to you. What are your suggestions for implementing a scalable and sustainable framework for auditable data protection?
So I think the most important thing is being flexible, understanding that everybody's going to have different requirements. Being rigid in your structure is not going to make anything work. I think the hardest part of building a sustainable framework is building something that doesn't scale, whether that's number of people, size of organization, compliance agendas that come from different organizations, a compliance requirement from a specific business. I think building yourself into a hole is probably one of the worst things you can do. And so being flexible and open to change in the dynamics of the space is probably one of the things that will be helpful.
Anush, what are your suggestions?
For sure. I think I agree with Ryan. And to add to it, there are 3 things that I would imagine is important for a system that does auditing, right? One is coverage, making sure you cover every scenario that you need in terms of proving to your auditors that you're doing the right thing. Second is latency, so your data should be as fresh as possible. And third is making it usable and basically using the context-based approach, the thing we discussed earlier in the talk, where I can kind of group my audit trails around a specific event, so like an application or a user access, right? So things like tagging would be very helpful. And I think it goes back to different CSPs come up with different types of audit trails, so it's really hard for customers to stitch them together to do forensics or prove to auditors that they're doing the right thing. So having a cloud agnostic framework that paints the right picture across all the data access paths, in our opinion, would be very helpful for customers.
Yoav.
Yeah, from our side, we think the best strategy is to adopt something called a data security platform that can cover the enterprise, the full scope of an enterprise use case. And it could be production workloads, it could be analytics, it can be data science, and obviously you can imagine different types of data platforms, technologies are being used in every environment, and cover multi-cloud, even hybrid on-prem use cases, and generating that holistic universal view of data security. That's not something that companies can do with just one technology. It has to be its own product that knows how to do that. That's what a data security platform does. And I think for forward-looking companies, that's the way to go.
So I want to thank you guys. We're nearing the end of our time together. I want to give each one of you just a little bit of time to kind of summarize or provide some last thoughts before we wrap up. Let's go to Ryan.
Sure. So as I think about kind of the data journey as we've moved, I think understanding that things are going to change, that the organization underneath you, the customers around you are going to continue to evolve. Having the ability to adopt new and emerging technologies that support multi-cloud or support multi-vendor. I think all of these things provide a capability that allows security and compliance to be effective in a large data organization. And so as I think about this, for anybody who's a security person specifically, I think about understanding what does and doesn't work, and knowing that the models have changed and will continue to change. I think it'll be a constant challenge to keep up with the speed and pace that this area is continuing to grow. But I think that is probably part of the fun. And so my challenge to security people and compliance organizations is try and keep up, because the business isn't going to stop for us.
Thanks. Yoav, any last thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll share a thought from one of our customers. And basically what they said is you have to make the secure way the easy way for users to get access to data. So basically what this means is that invest in the end user experience, make it easy for users to get access to the data via the secure mechanism instead of, trying to go around the system and so on. I'm a security professional, but security doesn't have to be, slowing things down. Security can be an enabler if you invest in the end user experience, if you invest in the workflow. So that's my advice and the way we think about this.
Anush, we've got about 60 seconds for you to share your last thoughts.
For sure, I fully agree. Secure by design should be the core part of any data security strategy. And as you're thinking about spreading your data across multiple sources, having a unified view of what's going on is key. So at the end of the day, you want your data scientists to be able to do what they want to do from business perspective as quick as possible. And then so making it invisible, making it consistent is key in being able to win against potential threats. And I think, keeping in mind that the target is moving, given that the compliance requirements keep changing. So having that centralized way of doing this, a common control plane across all these is key to having a strategy that can evolve and adapt to the new requirements that are really changing, right? And so that will be my top recommendation on how to think about security for data.
Well, that about wraps up our time on this expert roundtable. I want to thank Anush Satori, Yoav Cohen, and Ryan Kelch for joining as our experts on this experts panel. And I'm going to hand it back to Doug.
Thanks, David. And thanks, gentlemen, for that great discussion. Well, that does it for this expert roundtable. I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.